The Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Pride Seeds,
Ingenia Herbicide,
and Cruiser Max Vibrance Beans.
All right, joining us here on Real Agriculture, we have Laura Schmidt, production specialist with Manitoba Pulse and soybean growers. And Laura, it's been a few years since we really first learned about glyphosate-resistant kochia being present here in Western Canada, here in Manitoba. What do we know in terms of where of the prevalence, I guess, of this weed and where it's all showing up at this point?
Sure. So kochia, herbicide-resistant kochia. This is kind of a weed we've been monitoring because it has such a large seed set and a kind of a rapid development of herbicide resistance. So the group 9 glyphosate resistant has definitely been increasing in this weed. So right now, kind of the ways we've been monitoring for it is there's a herbicide weed survey that's conducted by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So the first iteration of this survey took place in 2014, where they collected samples of kochia across Manitoba and then brought them to the greenhouse, grew them out, determining if they were resistant, intermediate resistance, or if they were still susceptible. So this 2014 survey, that's kind of what fed into this 2018 map that we've all kind of seen so far. That survey, they only found 2 resistant populations of glyphosate, which is, great in terms of, herbicide resistance. But this survey was repeated again in 2018. They took samples across Manitoba, and testing them out has been a little bit slower and delayed due to COVID, which is too bad. But the glyphosate results are in, and our herbicide resistance took a big jump, specifically our glyphosate resistance in kochia. So in 2014, we were looking at 1% of the population was resistant to glyphosate, and now we're looking at 59% resistance. So it's now more likely that if you have an uncontrolled kochia population, it's more likely that it's glyphosate resistant than not, which is concerning. So we kind of developed this new map here, and that's a combination of the results from this 2018 AFC survey, as well as samples that have been sent into the Pest Surveillance Initiative lab. So PSI has this really wonderful rapid in-season test for glyphosate resistance. So you can send them a sample and get that tested. I think it's $125, or it's free for Manitoba Canola Grower Association members. So if it's a issue you suspect you have, I would totally take that test and find out yourself if you have a glyphosate resistance issue you need to start managing. That being said, about glyphosate resistance, there's also quite common for it to have group 2 resistance. That's quite widespread. And then the COVID results we're waiting for right now in Manitoba, that's kind of new and emerging, is we want to find out if it has group 4 resistance. We need to know if it's susceptible to dicamba or not. So in the last survey in Saskatchewan, it was confirmed to be resistant to dicamba as well as fluroxapyr. I think I'm saying that one right. So we kind of want to see if we have that in Manitoba here yet, with it being in our neighbors to the west. And then the one we kind of want to look out for, especially in, pulse growing production areas, is down the pipeline. We're kind of anticipating group 14 resistance to be the next one, because those are the herbicides we're really leaning on right now to control kochia. There's a lot of selection pressure there, so we don't want to overuse our group 14. So we want to think about layering our pre and post options, and also mixing up those mode of action where we can, especially in these pulse crops and soybean crops where we don't have as many options to target kochia control.
So in terms of how growers manage this, do we just assume that if we have a kochia problem that it's glyphosate resistant at this point?
I hope not.
No, we should still get it tested? If 59, I just mean if 50-some% are testing positive? Or
yeah, resistant? I think it's worthwhile to still getting it tested in your field to know where you're at, because you can have a whole population range in your field. You can have susceptible as well as resistant. And what we really want to target is not moving towards more resistance, essentially. So what we're kind of looking at for kochia control goals in pulse crops and soybeans too, certainly, is really that preceding weed control is quite critical. Using a soil applied and or a spring burn down with some residual activity. Consider a tillage pass over those early flushes. Maximize your crop competitiveness. So in a lot of cases, that's going to be narrowing those row widths, increasing your plant populations, appropriate fertility, making sure your crop is using the fertility you put down and not those saline areas where kochia is kind of thriving, you know. Also, it's an early emerging weed, so it's going to be, you know, more advanced when you go in for your post-application weed control. So it's really critical to kind of catch it when it's small. And that's where we can look at incorporating more of those mechanical weed control tools like tillage and stuff. And then if we're looking, you know, later in the season, we're in crop and we see we have this kind of problem, you really want to control those patches, mow them, bale, graze, spot tillage, burn, hand pull, you know, all those fun things to make sure that it's just minimizing the seed set, because like kochia is producing so many seeds, right? But in terms of seed bank persistence and how long those seeds are surviving out there, they don't have that longevity. So the majority of them are going to be away after, or no longer viable, that's the word, after 2 years. So if we can manage the amount of seeds going out there and kind of getting rid of those, what is in the seed bank, we'll kind of be able to manage this weed a little bit better.
All right. Thanks for your time, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me, Dylan.